Chapter 1: The Text That Cut Me Out. They said Thanksgiving would be small, and somehow that never included me, so I, Danielle Hart, opened the doors of a $5 million ranch and set one long, equal table for everyone. They forgot guitars on the porch, laughter in rooms my parents had never entered, and when the phones lit up the next morning, I put them on speaker and listened as Grandma finally named the truth they had hidden behind cozy plans and golden child stories. And in that clean silence, I learned I did not need their approval to choose who gets a chair, only the courage to build the table myself. The office had that late afternoon hush that comes when Manhattan starts to turn gold and the city breathes between meetings. I was finishing notes from a supply chain review, letting my eyes rest on the river as the sun slid behind the glass towers. My phone buzzed on the desk. I did not rush. I was not expecting good news. I tapped the screen and saw my mother's name. The preview line showed the first words. Just Mitch's family this year, keeping it small. I opened the message and read it all the way through. There was no greeting, no hey honey, no we love you. Just a neat little verdict dressed as logistics, Thanksgiving, a smaller guest list, a single seat that somehow never seemed to include me. The room felt a degree colder. I set the phone down and pressed my fingertips against the oak edge of the desk, steady and flat. A meeting agenda sat in front of me, numbers lined up in clean rows, proof that I knew how to put a chaotic system in order. I had built entire networks to make sure medicine arrived where and when it would save lives. But there are systems you cannot optimize. There are families that do not notice when you have learned to move mountains. I leaned back in my chair and watched my own breath fog the window. The first memory that surfaced was not dramatic. It was a cafeteria table in Fort Wayne, the long one where my brother sat with the teammates who wore their school pride like armor. My mother always found that table first. Her laugh sounded brighter there. She would fix the collar of his jersey and ask about practice. My plate sat on a smaller table behind her elbow. I learned to eat fast. I blinked and the window cleared. The phone buzzed again, a second line from my mother. It said, "Hope you understand." The words carried the softness of a throw pillow over a bruise. I picked up the phone and let the screen rest in my palm. I thought about the last time she used my name for something beyond a reminder that I work too much. I tried to remember when my father last asked about a project and waited for the answer. The light outside shifted to copper. Cars moved below like a slow river of tin. I slid the chair forward until the wheels clicked against the rug and opened the drawer where I keep a stack of blank cards. Each one was embossed with the logo from the company I sold 2 years ago. A habit I had not broken, a quiet reminder that I had once taken a risk no one at home believed was worth taking. I took one card out, set it down, and then laughed at myself. No card would fix this. This was not a misunderstanding. This was muscle memory inside a family. My mother reached for Mitch first. The rest of us learned to make do with whatever was left. I let the card sit and reached for water instead. The glass was cold and tasted like metal. That taste sent me straight back to a different room, a garage in Indiana, with a space heater that clicked and groaned all winter. I was 16 and fascinated with the way current behaves when you ask it to. I repaired a neighbor's radio, then a cousin's laptop. I went to Georgia Tech on a scholarship that felt like a portal opening under my feet. At the commencement ceremony, I waited for a text from home that said, "We are proud of you, Danielle." My father sent a photo of Mitch grilling in the backyard with the caption, "First ribs of the season." Congratulations were implied. They never quite arrived. The phone lay quiet for a full minute. Then the lock screen lit with a different name, Aaron. My cousin, the one who remembers details, the one who sends the first happy birthday message because he sets a reminder and then actually cares when it goes off. He wrote me that he and Kayla were figuring out their own Thanksgiving plans and asked casually if I would be in North Carolina at the end of the month. I stared at the screen and felt the tightness in my chest shift a little. I did not answer him yet. That was for later. Right now I wanted to understand what the quiet inside me was saying. It was not the flaring sting I used to feel. It was not the old rush of hot anger that made me want to argue my way into a place at a table that had been set without me. What stirred now was cooler. It was a click of decision, like the sound a door makes when it closes fully on the latch. I stood and crossed the office to the coat rack. The city had darkened and the river was turning steel. I pulled on the navy coat I love because it fits my shoulders exactly, and because it reminds me of a promise I made to myself the day I signed the sale documents. I promised I would not explain my worth to anyone who had already decided not to see it. Back at the desk, I woke the phone again and reread my mother's message. Just Mitch's family this year, keeping it small. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. Every old instinct rose like static. Say it would be fine. Say you will stop by for dessert. Offer to help with the turkey so she will hear your voice in her kitchen. I let the static pass. The quiet returned. I typed a single word. Enjoy. I did not add a period. I did not add a heart. I watched the word sit by itself and felt how right that looked. I hit send and locked the screen. The air in the room changed a fraction. It might have been nothing more than the heat cycling on. It felt like the first square of a boundary chalked clean on a gym floor. A line I could see and choose to defend. I sat again and opened the calendar on my laptop. The last week of November was blue with travel holds that I had never actually confirmed. For years, I had built my holidays around flights and polite compromises. I would land in Indiana with gifts wrapped and a smile ready, hoping the effort would be noticed. I would leave on Sunday with a headache and the feeling of having disappeared inside my own childhood for 3 days. I stared at the blocks on the screen and started to clear them. A dinner in Midtown I did not need to attend. A tour of a new warehouse that could wait until January. The cursor blinked over the word Thanksgiving. The city lights flickered on as if to approve. I closed the laptop and watched the reflection of the room appear on the dark screen. 38. That age still surprised me when I said it in my head. It sounded like a mountain range when I had been 22 and desperate to prove I belonged in a world that liked its winners tall and loud and usually male. Now it just felt like a well-made coat. It fit, it warmed, it did not ask permission. My phone buzzed with one more message. This time it was a group thread titled Heart Family Thanksgiving. I had not seen it light in months. My mother had added a photo of a dining room set with new chairs and a center arrangement of leaves and candles. She had written that the table looked just perfect for 6 and that they were excited to have a cozy day. I watched the thumbs up from my father appear. Then Mitch added a line about bringing a new board game the kids loved. The old ache tugged once and then let go. I was not angry with the children. None of this was their doing. It occurred to me that maybe the smaller table had been set like this for years, and I had only just now decided to notice. I picked up my bag, slipped the phone into the side pocket, and turned off the light. The hallway outside my office smelled like paper and carpet cleaner, and the coffee someone always brews after 4, even though no one ever finishes it. The elevator took its time. I did not mind. When the doors opened, the city reached up bright and impossible, full of places that had nothing to do with old patterns. On the sidewalk, I paused while a rush of commuters shouldered past. A vendor at the corner had started ladling soup into white cups that steamed in the cold. A girl in a red coat laughed into her scarf and hurried to keep pace with a friend. Taxis sounded impatient 2 streets over. Everything moved. Everything kept its rhythm whether or not you were invited to a particular table in a particular house on a particular Thursday. I took my phone out once more before I tucked it away. I scrolled to my cousin's message and typed that I might be in North Carolina for the holiday and asked how his schedule looked. I did not hit send, not yet. I saved the draft and let the screen go dark. I looked north toward the park and then south toward the river. The decision sat inside me like a clean line. I would not call my mother back. I would not ask my father to intervene. I would not send a last-minute check in to my brother to see if there was room for one more. The word was already sent. Enjoy. The rest would follow. I walked east toward the train, the city air crisp against my face, feeling the weight of the day shift from my shoulders to the ground where it belonged. Chapter 2. Growing Up Invisible. The smell of that office coffee faded, and in its place came the dry scent of old bleachers. My mind had taken me back to Fort Wayne, back to Friday nights, where the whole town seemed to orbit around a football field. I can still see the stadium lights piercing through the fall air, casting long beams across the neighborhood. Mitch was out there on the field, number 12, stitched across his jersey, tall and confident, the kind of boy the newspapers loved to photograph. My mother stood beside me on the sidelines, her scarf pulled tight, shouting his name until her voice cracked. "Go, Mitch!" she would yell, her mittened hands clapping together. She never shouted mine. I was only the sister holding her purse, the girl who kept her grades high but never drew a crowd. When Mitch threw a touchdown, the bleachers erupted. My father raised both fists in the air and slapped the back of another dad like he had just won the championship himself. At home later, my mother would set down a steaming casserole and say, Mitch, you carried the whole team tonight. You are going to have scouts knocking on our door. My father would grin at him and say, with that arm, you can get anywhere you want. I would sit at the same table, fork in hand, waiting for someone to ask about the circuit board I had rebuilt in the garage or the science fair project that won me a ribbon. The conversation would drift on without me like a radio tuned to a channel that never played my song. One night I tried. I had fixed the broken VCR with nothing but a soldering iron and a manual I checked out from the library. I slid a tape inside to prove it worked. The screen flickered, then played a clean picture of the local news. Mitch had been on the field again, a highlight reel running across the bottom. My mother's eyes went to the television, not to the machine. She pointed and laughed. Look at your brother, that is our boy. I swallowed the words I had rehearsed and carried the VCR back to the garage. By 16, I learned the only audience I could count on was myself. I tinkered with radios and built little circuits until my fingertips smelled like copper. My teachers noticed, though. One of them pulled me aside and said, Danielle, you should look at engineering schools. You have a mind that wants to know how everything works. That single sentence felt like a key pressed into my palm. Senior year of high school was a blur of late nights, not at parties, but bent over textbooks and practice exams. Mitch had his photos in the local paper. I had scholarship letters in plain envelopes. When I opened the one from Georgia Tech full tuition from 2005 through 2009, my chest lit with fire. I ran down the stairs, holding the letter, waving it in the air. My mother was frosting a cake for Mitch's end-of-season party. She smiled politely, said, "That is nice, honey," then asked if I could set the plates. Mitch came through the door a few minutes later, and she threw her arms around him, announcing the bakery had added his name and extra icing. At graduation, my father leaned over to whisper that Mitch looked sharp in his gown. I was 4 rows away, clutching my honors cord, waiting for him to see me walk. I think he clapped, but by then I had trained myself not to measure my worth by the sound of his hands. College was freedom. In Atlanta, I could finally speak without being muffled by the roar of a football crowd. I built robots that crawled across tables, coded systems that managed power flows, stayed up until sunrise, with classmates who thought circuits were beautiful. But when I called home to share the line, was full of news about Mitch. He had taken over shifts at Dad's hardware store. He was getting married young. He was a father before I finished my second year. My mother would say, "You know your brother works so hard, Danielle. He is keeping the family name alive." I would nod into the phone and say, "Yes, Mom, proud of him too." Then I would hang up and return to my soldering iron, the one voice that always listened. At 22, I learned just how invisible I was. My birthday fell near Christmas. I flew home from Georgia, suitcase heavy with gifts bought from tutoring money. I walked into the living room and saw the tree lit, the stockings lined. My brother's kids were tearing open packages while my parents posed with them for photos. No one remembered. Not a cake, not a candle, not a mention. Instead, they showed me the glossy picture of Mitch carving ham, the whole family around him. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a group text. It was a photo of Mitch and his kids in matching pajamas, the caption reading, "Best Christmas ever." I stared at it in the dark and whispered to myself, "Happy birthday, Danielle." That night, I sat on the porch steps, snow falling soft around me, and I made a vow. If they could forget me in plain sight, then I would stop asking them to notice. I would rise by my own measure. I would build something no one could take credit for, something too large to ignore even if they tried. I went back to Georgia and threw myself deeper into my work. Professors talked about graduate programs, but I wanted the world, not more classrooms. I wanted to see if I could turn the sparks in my mind into something that lived and breathed outside of a notebook. The vow I made on that snowy porch in Fort Wayne stayed hot in my chest. Years later, when the news would show Mitch coaching Little League or running the hardware store, I would watch in silence. My parents still sent the clippings highlighting him with yellow marker. "Look at what your brother has done." The ache would come for a second, then pass. I reminded myself that I had promised not to beg for a seat at their table anymore. That promise became the seed of everything. The engine that drove me through long nights, the reason I accepted loneliness when it came. The birthday they forgot, the applause they never gave, the endless tilt of attention toward Mitch. It all hardened into a truth. The injustice was not a passing storm. It was the climate of my family. And if I wanted warmth, I had to build my own fire. The memory settled over me like a heavy quilt. Back in the present, I sat in my apartment in Manhattan, the city outside buzzing with life. I could still hear the echo of the crowd chanting my brother's name. I could still see the way my mother's eyes skipped over me to find him. But now I understood. That pattern was carved too deep to erase. The only way forward was to stop standing in the shadow and step into a light I made myself. I exhaled and let the memory fade, the vow still intact, waiting to guide me into whatever came next. Chapter 3: Building in Silence. I woke up before the sun in St. Louis with the cheap blinds rattling and the radiator ticking like an old clock. The apartment smelled like solder and burnt coffee. I spread invoices across the kitchen table and opened my laptop while the city was still quiet. That was how it went for years. 14 hours most days, sometimes more when the code refused to yield or when a hospital buyer wanted one more demo at 8 at night. In 2010, the company was no more than a file name and a stubborn idea. I wanted a system that could look down a tangled map of suppliers and trucks and hospital storerooms and say this is where it will break before it breaks. The only people who believed me were 2 grad students I paid in pizza and a nurse manager at a community hospital who let me shadow her for a week. The nurse manager was named Colleen. She watched me sketch on a whiteboard beside a closet full of IV sets and masks. The air smelled like antiseptic and worry. I asked her what kept her up at night. She said shortages in trucks stuck at docks and the way demand spikes without warning. She tapped the whiteboard with her pen. If you can tell me what is about to go missing before it does, you will save lives. Back at the apartment, I built models that drank data and spit out warnings. I stitched together purchase orders, weather reports, port delays, flu trends, driver schedules. The code was ugly at first. It worked anyway. A hospital in Columbia tested it, then a system in Springfield. Each time the alerts arrived, someone avoided a crisis and sent me an email that said, "Keep going." Investors were not impressed. I wore the same navy dress to meetings because it was the only one that looked the part. They smiled and asked who else was on the team and if I had a co-founder with a famous last name. I walked out of a glass office once and burst out laughing on the sidewalk because the partner had just told me logistics was not a story anyone wanted to hear. That night, I went back to the kitchen table, poured cold coffee, and wrote a better demo. Rent came due whether the demo worked or not. My landlord was kind until he was not. He stood in the hallway one hot July and said the 3rd is the 3rd. I nodded and said I knew. Then I went upstairs and called 3 hospital buyers in a row until one of them said, "Fine, show me what you have on Monday." I met him with a laptop that shook in my hands and a voice that did not. He signed a pilot and I paid the rent 1 hour before the deadline. By 2016, we had 5 paying hospitals and 2 drivers who texted me when storms shut down I-70. The team grew. I hired a data scientist named Priya who liked to sit on the floor and sort problems into stacks. I hired an operations lead named Mark who knew every dock supervisor in a 3-state radius. We moved into a small office that smelled like new paint and possibility. I bought a used van so we could visit sites without borrowing cars. I was too tired to celebrate. I slept on the office couch that first week and woke at 3 to write out a roadmap by hand because typing felt too loud. I called home with the updates out of habit. My mother said that Mitch was adding a new line of grills at the store and that the local paper ran a feature on small businesses. My father said he could introduce me to a supplier who sold fasteners. I thanked them and told them we were working with hospitals now. There was a pause, then my mother said, "Make sure you get some rest, dear. Mitch barely sleeps either." In early 2020, the world tilted. I sat in the office with the television on mute watching a map bloom red. Colleen called from the hospital. Her voice was steady and thin. "If your system can do what you say, we need it everywhere by next week." I promised her I would try. Those weeks were a tunnel. We pulled data feeds where none existed. We begged distributors to open APIs. Priya wrote code until her wrists ached. Mark slept in his chair and woke to call drivers at dawn. I ate from vending machines and kept a toothbrush in my desk. The alerts multiplied. They were ugly, a wall of red flags. Then the hospitals started to report that the wall had meaning. Vent circuits rerouted from Ohio in time. A shipment of masks redirected around a frozen hub. A rural ER kept stocked because we saw a spike coming 2 counties over. I answered emails at 3 in the morning that said you do not know us, but whatever you are doing, keep doing it. In the middle of that tunnel, a man in a gray suit appeared on our screen. He was from a Fortune 100 company that handled half the medical supply chain in the country. He kept his voice gentle, like he was stepping into a room full of sleeping patients. He said they had seen our signals and wanted to talk partnership. I said we did not have time for a courtship and asked if he could put trucks where our maps told him to put them. He said yes. For the next 3 months, that was all we did. We spoke in short sentences and answered with movement. When the worst eased, he came back with a different conversation. He said his name was Anthony and that his board wanted to discuss an acquisition. He said he knew I was not sleeping much and that this could give the system the reach it needed without me burning to ash. I told him I would listen. My lawyer told me to get everything in writing. Priya told me she would go wherever the work stayed honest. Mark told me he had never seen anything like what we built and that he trusted my gut. The diligence was a maze. We opened our code and our contracts. Their lawyers asked questions that came in neat lists. I answered every one of them. We argued over price and over control and over what would happen to the people who had slept in their chairs. I said the number needs to reflect not just math, but the nights we kept people alive. Anthony did not flinch. He went back to his board. When he returned, the offer was $185 million and guarantees for the team. I read the number 3 times. The room had the hush of a church with no one in it. We signed in a conference room with a table the size of a boat. Anthony slid the pen to me with a look that said he knew what this meant. My hand shook only once. The wire hit the next day. I stood in that same apartment where the radiator had ticked my first winter and watched a number appear that did not seem to fit inside a bank app. I turned the phone over on the table and sat very still. I did not call my parents. I did not know how to hear the silence that would follow. What I did instead was sleep. Then I went for a run in Forest Park, and it was early enough that the grass shone with dew and no one had started mowing yet. I thought about the mechanical honesty of supply lines, about how trucks move when you point them, about how people sometimes do not. I thought about a place with room to breathe that was mine alone. I flew to Asheville to look at land and stepped out of the rental car into a morning that smelled like pine and river stone. A realtor named Beth hiked me up a ridge in boots that had seen more life than mine. We stopped where the trees opened like a curtain and the Blue Ridge rolled out in layers. Beth watched my face and smiled. She said she knew before I did. We walked the boundary markers and listened to a hawk tilt the air. 38 acres, water that ran clear. I signed the offer that afternoon. Designing the lodge felt like building a circuit I could live inside. I wanted wood that glowed in winter and glass that pulled the mountains into the room. I wanted a kitchen that could hold 4 conversations at once and a long table made from a single slab smooth under the hand. The architect in town was a woman who had built her own studio after working in firms that did not give her a voice. We spoke the same language. She drew lines that understood both strength and comfort. The crew poured the foundation in late 2021. I brought them hot coffee on the mornings when your breath hung like smoke. By the time the certificate of occupancy came in 2022, the place felt settled, not raw. The stone fireplace took a flame like it had been waiting. The bedroom smelled faintly of cedar. At night, the porch held a dark so soft I could hear owls move along the tree line. I kept the address off the internet and the photos off my phone. When Beth asked if my family would visit soon, I smiled and said someday. She looked like she wanted to understand. She let it rest. I drove the gravel road alone the first weekend I stayed. I opened every window and leaned on the railing while the sky went from blue to ash to a black full of stars. Freedom arrived without noise. Power did too. They did not feel like a shout. They felt like a steady pulse in the wrist. I thought of calling home to say I had found a place that felt like a prayer answered. I set the phone down on the table and watched the fire instead. The room moved with light and shadow, and for the first time in a long time, no one could forget me here. Chapter 4. A table of my own. Morning light filtered through the wide windows of the lodge, and the quiet seemed to ask what I would do next. I poured coffee, leaned against the counter, and scrolled through my phone until my thumb landed on Aaron's name. My cousin had always been the one who noticed when I slipped through the cracks, the one who sent cards on time and remembered details no one else cared about. I pressed call before I could think twice. He answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the muffled hum of an office. Danielle, hey, I was just about to call you. About what? I asked, surprised. He hesitated, then let out a short laugh. You got the message too, didn't you? You mean the one from Judy. Small Thanksgiving. Just Mitch's family. Yeah, Aaron said, lowering his voice. We didn't make the cut either. Neither did Grandma Evelyn, or half the cousins for that matter. The words landed heavier than I expected. It was not just me. The table had been carved down to fit one branch, leaving the rest of us outside. I paced across the kitchen, the wooden floor creaking under my slippers. So it is not about keeping it small, I said quietly. No, Aaron replied, it is about keeping it Mitch. Grandma was furious. She told me yesterday she felt like an afterthought in her own family. I pressed a hand to my chest as if steadying the thud of my heart. The picture formed so clearly, my parents arranging the table with only one side of the family in mind, pretending it was logistics. Aaron, I said, pausing at the window where the ridge rolled into the horizon. Come here instead. Bring Kayla, bring the kids if you want. I have space. He let out a low whistle. You serious? Dead serious. I am not sitting out another holiday. If they want small, let them have small. We will have the rest. Aaron chuckled, the sound full of relief. I will tell Kayla tonight. She is going to love this. After the call ended, I stood in the silence of the lodge and felt the decision take root. If the family table had no room for me, I would build one of my own. I opened a notebook and started lists. First food, not just turkey and potatoes, but dishes that would speak to each person. I called a chef in town, a woman named Carla, whose farmhouse suppers had a reputation across Asheville. Carla, I said when she picked up, how do you feel about cooking for 30 people on Thanksgiving? She laughed, not missing a beat. If the kitchen is big enough, I am in. It is big enough, I promised, and we began to plan. Then I moved on to the rooms. Uncle Ray liked bourbon from Kentucky, so I wrote down a bottle of his favorite waiting on the nightstand. Aunt Leia did crossword puzzles in pen, so I marked to place a fresh book in her room with a new pen clipped to the cover. For the little ones, I ordered toy sets and stacked them in the corner bedrooms. Each note was a stitch in a quilt sewing together something no one could call an afterthought. As I walked through the hallways checking what still smelled of new wood, I remembered. Another choice from years back, one that had shaped everything. It was 2015, and I was sitting in a dim restaurant with a man named Michael. He had been kind and patient through the long hours of my work. He reached across the table that night, a small box in his hand, his voice shaking as he said my name. For a second, I let myself imagine it, a life of dinners and anniversaries and children who called me Mom. Then the weight of my unfinished company pressed in. The pilots were fragile, the code was still rough, and every day mattered. Michael, I whispered, I cannot. His face fell. I touched his hand, wishing it could be enough. I am not ready to choose this over what I am building. I watched him leave that night with his shoulders heavy, and though I cried, I did not chase him. That sacrifice had carried me here. Remembering it now only sharpened my resolve. The life I had chosen demanded proof, and this Thanksgiving would be that proof. The phone buzzed again on the counter. I answered without looking. Danielle, a warm voice said, slow and sure. It was Grandma Evelyn. Hi, Grandma, I said softly, bracing myself. I heard about your mother's plans, she said. Aaron told me you are doing something different. Yes, I want you here, all of you. Her breath caught, then she chuckled. Tell me when to pack. I pressed a hand to my eyes, blinking away the sting. Come as soon as you want, Grandma. I will have a room ready. I cannot wait to see this place of yours, she replied. I always knew you would build something strong. After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen, phone clutched against my chest. The house felt alive, every beam and stone leaning toward me, echoing her words. Tell me when to pack. For the first time in years, I felt like the heart of something, not the shadow. I moved to the long wooden table in the dining hall, ran my hand across its surface, and pictured it lined with faces that had been cut away too often. This time, no one would be forgotten. This time, the table was mine. Chapter 5. The Thanksgiving They'll Never Forget. By noon, the driveway filled with the crunch of tires on gravel, and the air took on that charged feeling of a festival about to start. I stepped onto the porch as Aaron's SUV rounded the last bend and rolled to a stop. He climbed out and stood with the door still open, eyes scanning from the ridge to the lodge and back again. Holy hell, Danny. This is yours. It is, I said, laughing, because the wonder in his voice loosened something inside my chest. Come see the kitchen. Wait until you smell what Carla is doing with the herbs. Kayla unbuckled their 2 kids and set them down. The little one ran straight for the open meadow arms, out like he expected to lift off the ground. Aaron turned in a slow circle, taking in the wraparound porch, the stone chimney, the line of blue mountains marching into the distance. You built this the way you build everything, he said. Quiet. Then all at once. Before I could answer, a second car eased in behind them. Eli stepped out with a duffel over his shoulder and a grin that looked a little stunned. You have got to be kidding me, he said, pushing his hair out of his eyes. Is there a movie shooting here, or is this your house? It is home, I said. Come inside. You are in the north bedroom off the second hall. Windows face the trees. He whistled. I am going to need to FaceTime my entire life. Cars kept arriving. The door swung open on a breeze of voices and cold air, and the kind of laughter that starts in the belly. Carla moved between the oven and the butcher block with calm authority, her assistants gliding around her like a practiced crew. The room carried that intoxicating blend of butter and rosemary and heat. I handed out room keys, hugged shoulders, and pointed down hallways. Aunt Laya came last among the early arrivals, both hands holding a pie like it was a fragile treasure. She stepped into the entry and froze. Her eyes moved up the height of the timber frame and across the long bare table and finally out the wall of glass to the ridge. Oh my, she whispered, the pie sagging slightly as her hands trembled. Oh my, look at this place. I set the pie on the console and pulled her close. She pressed her face to my shoulder, and when she drew back, her eyes were wet. I brought crosswords, I said softly. There's a new book in your room with a pen that does not skip. She made that tiny sound mothers make when a small thing means everything. You remembered. Always. The house woke up. Kids tore across the back lawn in wool hats, slipping in the damp grass and getting up with louder laughs. Someone tuned a guitar on the porch and found a melody that floated in and out of the open door. Uncle Ray lifted the bottle of bourbon from his nightstand when he discovered it and shouted my name down the hall. You got the good stuff for you, I called back. Save a pour for later. Two, he answered, and I could hear the grin in his voice. In the kitchen, Carla slid a sheet pan from the oven, and the skin on the turkey glowed like lacquer. She nodded toward the pot simmering on the back burners. Cranberries with orange zest, she said, and cornbread dressing that will make you call your grandmother. She is already here, I said, because I could hear Evelyn's laugh carry up the hall like a familiar song. I found her in the library, standing at the window with her palm on the glass, as if she could feel the cold through it. She wore a sweater the color of oatmeal and a brooch that had belonged to her mother. She turned when she sensed me and opened her arms without a word. I went into them and stayed there a long moment, inhaling the faint scent of powder and wool. Look at you, she said, stepping back to study my face. You set your jaw the way your grandfather did when he had made up his mind. It suits you. Come see the table, I said. We set it long and wide. No divisions. We walked back to the great room where the late sun poured in and lay across the polished top, like honey. I had spent that morning placing name cards, not in clusters, not stratified by generation, but a current of family that wound from one end to the other. Children next to elders, cousins beside aunts, conversation arranged like a braid. As the hour approached, I lit the candles. People moved toward the light carried by instinct. The guitars slid into a softer tune, and the chatter dissolved into a hush that is not silence so much as attention. I stood at one end and felt the weight of it. The thing I had dreamed in secret was now solid wood and faces and breath and warmth. Carla came out wiping her hands and nodded. We lifted lids and the room filled with steam and spice. I caught Aaron's eye as he pulled out a chair for Kayla and he mouthed thank you. Eli helped Aunt Leia with her napkin. Uncle Ray poured small tastes of bourbon for the elders at his end. Several of the kids whispered numbers and counted the chairs out loud as if to prove it was true that everyone had a place. I raised a hand and the murmurs subsided. My voice came out steadier than I felt. I do not have a speech. I only have a table. I want us all at it. That is all I ever wanted. A wave of small nods moved like wind in wheat. People started to pass dishes in both directions at once. Hands overlapped, elbows bumped. Someone laughed when the gravy boat needed a mid-table handoff. The sound was music. It had no conductor and did not need one. It knew what it was and where it was going. I tasted everything because to refuse would have insulted the love inside each recipe. The turkey was crisp and yielded with a sigh. The dressing tasted like stories told around a wood stove. The cranberries were bright with citrus, and the mashed potatoes held the perfect amount of butter. Conversation rose in gentle swells and fell again. I heard about a job promotion in Columbus, a new baby on the way in Lexington, a hard year in Evansville. That felt a little lighter tonight. No one asked who belonged or why. There was no split table for kids and adults. Lessons traveled down the line as easily as the sweet rolls. Halfway through the meal, Eli tapped his glass with a spoon. "Danny," he said with a foolish grin. "This is ridiculous." "Thank you," I said, and the table laughed. Grandma Evelyn leaned toward me. In the old house, she murmured, "We tried adding leaves to the dining table. It was never enough, not for all of us." "We have room now," I said. "We do." Later, when dessert had been cut and the last of the coffee poured, the light disappeared and the lodge settled into that pleasant hum that arrives when no one wants to go to bed yet. I slipped out to the porch for air. The moon was a thin slice. The cold put roses in my cheeks. Footsteps followed and then stopped. Evelyn stood beside me wrapped in a shawl. She looked out at the dark pines and the line of the ridge. "You gave us back Thanksgiving," she said, her voice low so it would not break. "Your parents never managed this." I swallowed. The words hit a tender place and held there. "Grandma, I said I only set the table." "You set the table," she said, turning to me, "and you opened the door. Those are not small things." I let my head tip against her shoulder for a second, the way I might have as a child. She lifted a hand and patted my cheek twice, as if sealing something good into the skin. "I am old," she said with a small smile. "I can say what others will not. What they have called small was about control. This is about belonging. Do not forget which one is worth your life." I nodded. The porch boards creaked as the door swung open and Aaron stepped out with 2 mugs. "Contraband hot chocolate for the hostess," he said, handing me one. "Extra marshmallows." "Thank you," I said, and the heat slid into my hands. He looked between us and the night and the warm windows. "I hope you know what you did tonight." Evelyn answered for me. "She knows," she said, "and if she forgets, I will remind her." From inside the house came a burst of laughter, high and bright. The guitar found a new song. Someone began washing plates and someone else made them stop. I watched the fog of our breath mix in the cold and drift apart, then vanish. The door opened again and children poured onto the porch to chase each other down the steps before being rounded back in by an aunt with a mock stern voice. The night drew itself tighter around us, a soft blanket rather than a wall. When I finally went back inside, the long table was a scatter of crumb and wax and empty glasses. It looked like proof. I ran my fingers along the wood and felt where a small fork had nicked the finish. I did not mind. A perfect table is a lonely table. This one had been used the way a table begs to be used. I blew out the last candle, watched a ribbon of smoke rise, and felt the house exhale with me. Chapter 6. The calls begin. Morning came with the faint clink of dishes and the low murmur of voices moving softly through the lodge. The fire had settled to a bed of coals, and a pale light slid through the glass like a new sheet being pulled over the mountains. I was pouring coffee when my phone began to buzz against the counter. The name on the screen made my stomach tighten. "Judy." I let it ring once more, then answered and pressed speaker. Grandma Evelyn sat at the kitchen table in her sweater hands around a mug. Aaron stood by the sink rinsing plates. Aunt Leah drifted in the doorway with a dish towel and did not pretend not to listen. "Hi, Mom," I said. Her voice came bright and careful. "Hi, honey. How are you this morning? Did you have a nice day yesterday?" "We did," I said. "That is good," she replied, the words stacking up quickly as if she had practiced them. "Your father and I wanted to touch base. We heard you had some people over. We were keeping Thanksgiving simple this year. We knew you are always so busy and we did not want to pressure anyone. You understand." I stared at the window. A blue jay hopped along the railing and tilted its head at its own reflection. "You thought I was too busy," I said slowly. "So you planned a small Thanksgiving and invited only Mitch and his family." There was a pause. Then she laughed in a way that made my shoulders rise. "It was not like that. You know how it is. Mitch has the kids. The table fits a certain number. We were aiming for cozy." Grandma lifted her eyes to mine over the rim of her mug and set it down. Aaron kept his back to us, but I saw his grip tighten on the sponge. I kept my voice even. Grandma and half the cousins were not invited either. Cozy is doing a lot of work in that sentence. "Danielle, my mother said you always take things so personally. We were trying to make it easy. You travel, you work. We thought we were giving you a break." I opened my mouth to answer, but Evelyn stood before the words formed. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "Judy," she said, clear as a bell stop, pretending this was kindness. There was a soft click in the silence, the sound of my mother drawing breath through her teeth. "You left your own mother off the list," Evelyn continued. "You left your nephews and your nieces. You left the people who have held this family together when it shook. And do not feed my granddaughter a story about her work, as if it is an inconvenience you courteously removed. You have been removing her since she was a girl. I am not blind." "Mother," my mother said, then faltered. "We were trying to keep it manageable." Mitch offered to help with the food. "It made sense. It made sense because you have been practicing it for years," Evelyn said. "You built sense out of habit, the habit of choosing Mitch first and last and always. You did it so long you tell yourself it is practical." On the other end, I heard my father's voice slide into the call, a lower register, trying for calm. Evelyn let us all take a breath. "Danielle, your mother did not mean anything by it. The house is not that big. We cannot seat 30. I felt the old reflex rise in me, the one that wants to soften the edges so no one has to feel the cut. I let it pass. "Dad," I said, and my voice held a thread of steel I had not heard before. "Stop. Please do not explain this away." He went quiet. The only sounds were the tick of cooling pans and the faraway thud of small feet upstairs. My mother tried another door. "We did not know you wanted to come," she said. "You never make plans in advance." Aaron turned eyebrows up and mouthed incredible to me. Aunt Leah shook her head once and looked at the floor. Evelyn stepped closer to the counter and placed her palm next to my phone. "Judy," she said, "listen to me like I am not your mother but a woman who has watched you long enough to speak the truth. Danielle could have called and begged and you still would have trimmed the table to fit the picture in your head. She was never the picture. That was your mistake." "Mother," my mother said, anger breaking through the sugar in her voice. "I am tired of the accusations. We love our daughter." "You love her when it does not ask anything of you," Evelyn replied. "You love her as long as loving her looks like clapping politely at the edges while you crown her brother. Love is not a performance, Judy. It is a chair you pull out even when the room is crowded. Especially when the room is crowded." I pressed my fingertips into the wood. My chest felt tight and clear all at once. For years I had rehearsed speeches in my head about fairness and attention. None of them landed like this. My father cleared his throat. "Danielle, we do not want a fight. You are making a big thing out of a holiday. Families move on. Traditions change. You have your life. We have ours." I closed my eyes. The line he had spoken was the same one that had excused so much forgetting. I found my breath and opened them again. "Traditions can change without shrinking," I said. "You could have added chairs. You chose not to. That is the part that hurts. Not the turkey. The choice." No one answered for a long 10 seconds. The kids upstairs began a new game that involved counting down from 10 and launching into a sprint when they hit 0. On the third launch, I heard my father exhale. My mother came back softer. "We did not think you wanted to be bothered," she said. "You seem happy where you are." "I am," I said. "I made room here, for all of us." There was a shuffle on the other end, then my mother's voice sharpened. "I heard you put on some kind of production. People said you had everybody out there. I hope you realize you embarrassed us." "It looked like you were making a point." Evelyn stared at the phone like it had grown teeth. I steadied my voice. "Maybe I was," I said. "Maybe I wanted to see what it felt like when everyone had a seat." The line went so quiet I thought the call had dropped. Then my father spoke smaller than before. "Danielle," he said, "what do you want from us?" "I do not want anything," I said. "I wanted you to hear what you never seemed to hear before." My mother sighed long and frayed. "Well," she said, "we have errands to run. We will talk later." The call ended with a soft click. I stared at the black screen. Aaron let out the breath he had been holding and leaned back against the sink. Aunt Leah wiped an imaginary spot on the counter that was already clean. Evelyn remained still, her hand still resting on the wood next to the phone. Another buzz. "Mitch." I did not step away. I hit accept and speaker again. "Danny," his voice came through a little too casual. "Heard about your big shindig? Looked like a lot." "You okay?" "I am fine," I said. He laughed like we were sharing a joke. "Mom is bent out of shape. You know how she gets. You did not have to make it a competition." "It was not a competition," I said. "It was dinner." "Come on," he said, the smile in his voice slipping. "You could have called me. We could have worked something out. No need to go nuclear. Nuclear is a strong word for feeding our family," I said. He went quiet, then tried the oldest card. "You know they depend on me. The kids, the store, the church stuff. I show up. That is why I get asked first. It is not favoritism. Evelyn made a small sound like a laugh that decided not to be polite. I kept my voice level. You get asked first because they ask you first. That is how cycles work. He blew out air. You always make things heavy, sis. I am just saying next time call me. I will not be calling you to ask permission to include our family, I said. The silence that followed felt less like quiet and more like a door learning how to close. Suit yourself, he said finally. We are good over here. Good, I said and ended the call. For a moment, no one moved. The room felt heavier, like a storm that had passed had left its weight in the air. Then the spell broke. Aaron set the sponge down and came to the table. He did not say anything. He set his hand on my shoulder and left it there a second, then two. Aunt Leia crossed herself without thinking, and then smiled at me, embarrassed and tender. Evelyn reached for my hand and squeezed. You did not have to raise your voice, she said. You raised the truth. It is louder than you think. I nodded and realized my jaw ached. I unclenched it and took a breath that felt clean. Outside, the light brightened, and in the distance, a truck on the county road sounded its faint horn. Upstairs, a child yelled, "Found you," and two others laughed so hard they hiccuped. The phone stayed on the table screen, dark, a quiet thing. The morning moved forward. The dishes got washed. The coffee pot emptied and filled again. I stood and stretched and felt the weight shift from my chest to the floor. We had said what needed saying. Now it could sit where it belonged. Chapter 7. Shifting the Power. The afternoon settled into a gentle rhythm as people packed and lingered and packed again. I was wiping down the long table when my phone buzzed with a text. Mitch. The message was short and trying to be casual. Did not expect that, but I get it. I stared at the words. They were neat as a shrug. No apology. No question. I felt the tug to answer, to fill the empty space with something that would smooth the edges. I set the phone face down and kept wiping. Silence could do its own work. 10 minutes later, another buzz. A thread from my mother. She had added my father. The first line wished me a good morning in a way that sounded like a customer service email. The second asked if we could stop by your place to talk, just us, sometime soon. I could hear my father in the phrasing. Calm, managerial, the voice of a man who wants the room to settle. I read it twice. I put the phone in my pocket and did not reply. People drifted in to say goodbye and then found reasons to stay a little longer. Aaron carried a box of leftover rolls to the car, then came back for coffee and stood in the doorway instead of leaving. Text from Mitch, he asked. I nodded. You going to answer? Not today. He watched me, then gave a small nod. That is an answer. Eli appeared with his duffel and a girl with eyes like lake water. He had mentioned her the night before a new love he spoke about in the careful tone of a man who knows a good thing and does not want to spook it. He held the door for her like a reflex, and she laughed when the cold hit her face. This place makes everything feel possible, she said, and then blushed. I mean, it is just beautiful. It is okay to say it, I said. It does feel possible out here. Eli squeezed her hand and looked at me. Thank you, Danny. For the bed that felt like a cloud. For the way you sat the kids next to Grandpa. For making all of this feel like we never lost anything. You did the rest, I said. Go. The road will be prettier if you take it slow. They left with the promise of a return, and I watched them cross the gravel as if I could bless them with my eyes. It surprised me that the tight place in my chest did not ache at the sight. Years ago, it would have a sharp reminder of the ring I did not take and the life I did not choose. Now it felt like watching a sail catch wind. I did not envy it. I recognized it. I had chosen my own wind. Messages kept arriving, photos from Lexington and Evansville and Columbus, kids wrapped in blankets holding cups of cocoa on my porch. An uncle who never texted typed out 3 words with a period between each one. Best. Thanksgiving. Ever. The words knocked at a place I did not know needed knocking. I copied that line on a piece of paper and tucked it into a drawer. Grandma Evelyn found me putting away wine glasses and shooed my hands from the sink. Let me, she said. You sit a minute. You do not have to keep proving you are the hostess. I do not feel like a hostess, I said. I feel like a tree that finally grew into its roots. She laughed softly. Good. Sit in that feeling. We moved to the porch with 2 blankets and the last of the coffee. The mountains wore the same quiet as the morning, but it felt friendlier now. The ache in me had become space. Your mother texted me, Evelyn said, tucking the blanket over her knees. She wants a visit with just you 3. I know, I said. I got the same message. What will you do? Nothing, for now. She studied my face. That is a fine choice as long as it is a choice and not a habit. It is a choice, I said. If I answer today, I will be pulled back into their script. I want a different one. She nodded and let the subject rest. We watched a hawk describe slow circles above the field. The cold cleared my thoughts like glass washed clean of smoke. Late afternoon brought the goodbyes for real. Aunt Leia pressed a stack of crossword puzzles into my hands as if I might run out. Uncle Ray insisted on leaving the bourbon, even though half of it was gone, which I suspected was his way of planting a flag. The little ones waved from car seats until their mittens fell off. Each departure was its own small ceremony, and none of them were rushed. When the last car taillights disappeared beyond the trees, the lodge felt expansive and intimate at once. I went room to room with a laundry basket, and the calm that arrives after a good story ends. In the library, the brooch that Evelyn wore was resting on the back of a chair. I picked it up and carried it to her, finding her in the kitchen with a book of recipes open like a journal. "You left this," I said. She pinned it back to her sweater and smiled. "Not on purpose. Maybe a little on purpose. What does that mean?" "It means I like reminders." I walked her to her room and kissed her cheek. After she closed the door, I stood in the hall a moment and listened to the old house noises that a new house makes when it decides to be old for you. I liked that decision. Back in the great room, I turned on a lamp, and the soft light puddled across the floor. My phone lit again on the table. A second message from my mother. "Later this week, coffee. We can fly down. Say yes." My father added a line about finding a date that worked for me. I watched the screen until it dimmed. The quiet did not feel like a punishment. It felt like a boundary anchored in bedrock. The fire took easily, and I sat cross-legged on the rug with a notebook. I wrote the names of everyone who had come, and then I wrote one sentence beside each name, a detail from the day I wanted to remember. The way Kayla steadied the smallest child with only 2 fingers at the base of his spine. The lopsided role Aunt Leia claimed and defended like a trophy. The way Aaron stood in the doorway many times with a look that said thank you so clearly he did not need to say it. As I finished the list, the front door opened and Aaron stepped in from loading the last bag. He looked tired in the contented way a good day makes you tired. "You could have left without coming back," I said. "I wanted to check on you," he said. "After the calls." "I am fine." He glanced at the phone on the table and back at me. "You are quiet. It suits you today." "I am choosing it," I said. He nodded. "You know they will press. They will ask to make it small and private and theirs again. I know. You going to let them? I am going to decide," I said. "On my timing, on my terms." He smiled. "There she is." He hugged me and left for real this time, and the sound of the door clicking shut was not an ending, but an affirmation. I added a line to the bottom of my list. The door knows how to close. It also knows how to open. Night drew in. I cooked a simple dinner because my hands needed a task that did not need me back. I ate by the window and watched the ridge turn to a silhouette. When I washed the plate and set it in the rack, my phone lit one last time. A cousin who rarely came to anything had sent a picture of his kids drawing at my table. The caption was 5 words, and they felt like a weight being lifted. We felt welcome. We belong. I carried the phone to the fireplace and sat on the hearth. The idea that had started as a single word in a text weeks ago had unfolded into something bigger. Enjoy. I had not thrown a rival holiday. I had set a table and watched gravity do the rest. The power that used to live in another house had migrated without noise. It was here now in the way people crossed my threshold and relaxed, in the way my own shoulders dropped an inch when I said no to a text, in the way my grandmother's voice sounded like a bell when she told the truth. I rested my palm on the warm brick and let that knowledge settle. The shift was not about money or size or even food. It was about the authority to choose who gathers and how. I did not have to argue for a seat anymore. I had chairs, I had a table, I had a door. When I stood to turn off the lamp and head down the hall, the phone stayed dark. The house breathed in its slow winter rhythm. I walked to my room with steps that felt sure and unhurried. The quiet followed like a companion I trusted. In the doorway, I looked back once at the long table and pictured it full again, then let the image fade so the room could rest. Chapter 8. Choosing who sits at my table. Snow began to collect along the porch railings in the week before Christmas, and the ridge wore a soft white rim. I stood at the long table and counted 4 plates. I set them far enough apart that no one had to reach for space and close enough that conversation would not have to strain. The invitation I sent was simple. Christmas dinner at the ranch, just us. I did not decorate for show. Pine boughs lay along the center with a line of small votives, and the tree in the corner wore white lights and a few ornaments that had followed me from apartments across different cities. They arrived on Christmas afternoon when the sky had the pale light of polished bone. The tires hissed over fresh snow and fell silent. I opened the door before they could knock. My mother stepped in first, and I smelled her perfume before I felt the cold at my back. My father came behind her carrying a tin of cookies. Mitch closed the door and stamped snow from his boots, eyes scanning the room, taking stock. Judy looked around as if the air itself might correct her posture. She touched the back of a chair, then let her hand fall. "This is very nice," she said, words measured. "Thank you," I said. "Coat's on the rack. Kitchen is warm." My father handed me the tin with a smile that did its best. "Your mother made the sugar ones you like." "Thank you," I said again and set it by the stove. We stood for a moment in the pause that follows an entrance. Then I turned to the work I had chosen. The menu was not a performance. Braised short ribs that had gone into the oven before dawn, a pan of roasted carrots with thyme, a salad with pears and walnuts rolls proofed on the counter while the house woke. The lodge filled with the slow scent of meat and rosemary and the faint sweetness of yeast. Mitch wandered to the window and stood with his hands in his pockets. He stared at the line where the trees began. "Quiet," he said. I forgot what that sounds like. "It is nice," I said. "Helps me think." My mother laughed lightly, a sound that wanted to smooth over 10 years. "You and your thinking." I let the comment pass and opened the oven. Heat rolled into the room. My father pulled a towel from the drawer and took the other side of the roasting pan without asking. "Where do you want it?" he said. "Right there," I said, and we set it down together. We moved toward dinner almost naturally. I placed the food in the center and poured water in thick glasses. No one reached for wine. The light shifted to gold and the candles answered. When we sat, I chose the seat across from my mother. It felt honest. For a few minutes, we talked about small things: the roads, the early snow. Mitch described the school concert his oldest had played in that week, and for once the story carried a quiet pride instead of a parade. I asked questions and listened and did not let the conversation split the table into winners and watchers. My mother's gaze kept catching on the beams and the stone and the sweep of glass. She tried to look casual and failed. "How long did this take to build?" she asked. 18 months, I said. "We finished last year." "It must have been a lot of work," she said softly, as if each word had to find its path. "It was," I said. "It was worth it." My father cleared his throat. "It is beautiful, Danielle," he said. "You did this well." "Thank you." We ate. No one rushed. The silence we shared felt like an animal learning to trust. Halfway through the meal, my mother set her fork down and folded her hands. Her eyes shone like she had been holding something for a long time and the lid had just now loosened. "I do not know how to start," she said. "We hurt you." The sentence hung there lighter for being simple. "I know," I said. "We told ourselves stories that made it easier to keep doing what we always did," she said. "It was a way to make the days quiet. That does not make it right." My father watched her and then looked at me. His voice came low. "I let easy win," he said. "It was easier to go along with what felt familiar. That is not the kind of man I like to think I am. I am sorry." Mitch shifted elbows on the table, eyes down at his plate. He inhaled and tried to make a joke. Then he stopped. He looked up. "I have been the center of gravity for a long time," he said. "I did not ask for it, but I did not refuse it either. I should have made space. I can say that now." I let the words settle. I did not reach across the table. I did not rush to absolve anyone. Forgiveness, if it came, would need room to breathe. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "I want to be clear about something. I did not build this to prove anything to you. I built it because it is mine and because I wanted a place where people do not have to ask if they belong." My mother looked at the candles and then at me. "We want to belong," she said. "Everyone can," I said, "if they sit as equals." No one spoke for several beats. Mitch nodded first. "All right," he said. "Equal works for me." I passed the salad bowl toward my mother. She took it and served herself without speaking, then set it down, her fingers resting for a moment on the rim, as if she needed the cool of the ceramic. The moment did not look like triumph, it looked like a tiny door opening. We cleared plates together. My father insisted on washing while I dried. My mother wiped the table in slow circles and at the end left one small crumb sitting near her water glass. She noticed it and brushed it into her palm. The ordinary mercy of that movement softened something in me I had not expected to loosen. When the dishes were stacked and the counters clean, I brought out the tin and set it between us with coffee. My mother lifted the lid and the kitchen filled with the scent of butter and vanilla. She took a sugar cookie and broke it in half. She handed me the larger piece. "Here," she said. I took it and ate. It tasted like Christmases when I was small and had not yet learned to lean away. After coffee, we put our coats on and walked the gravel drive. The snow had stopped and the sky was clear enough to show a handful of stars. My father fell a few steps behind and my mother matched my pace. She slipped her arm through mine like she had the first time she taught me how to cross a street in winter boots. "I am trying," she said. "I see that," I said. The trees stood black against the night and the air stung in a way that woke everything. We walked back to the porch and stood by the rail. Mitch scuffed his boot and smiled at nothing. "This place makes a person quiet," he said. "That is the idea," I said. Inside the house held its warmth like a promise. We said our goodnights by the door. My father hugged me and did not clap my back as if to turn tenderness into sport. My mother held my face in her hands for a second, a gesture so gentle it startled me. Mitch lifted a hand and let it fall and then pulled me into a quick embrace. None of it was perfect. All of it was honest. When the car lights disappeared down the lane, I went back to the kitchen and turned off the lamps. The room fell into a soft darkness that felt earned. I stood at the long table and ran my palm over the grain. This was not about winning a comparison I never wanted. It was not about a scoreboard. It was about choosing who gets a chair and making sure the chair is sturdy. Revenge was not the point. I had found something quieter and stronger. I had built a table and learned how to say yes in a voice that could also say no. The ranch settled around me, easy in its bones. I could hear the wind shift along the ridge and the faint crack of timber as it cooled. I thought of Grandma Evelyn asleep down the hall, and of the way her words had carved an opening for this day to happen. I thought of all the notes that had found me after Thanksgiving, of the kids drawing, and the uncles texting, and the aunts laughing, like the edge of a lake in summer. I felt a circle close and another one begin. If you have ever been set aside and told there is not enough room for you, listen to the quiet voice that rises when you stop asking for permission. You can build a table of your own with chairs that do not wobble and light that does not blind. If this story struck a chord, tell me where you would begin. Tell me who you would invite. Share your thoughts and stay with me here, because some journeys are easier when we take them together, and I want to know who you will choose to sit beside you.